Yeah, so basically, you know what I'm saying? Uh, me doing my research or whatever for my blog, the Aeta Negritos, an incredible legacy and whatnot. It's a lot of information that I have processed, and YouTube again. More than likely, this is another one of those clips, I guess you could say, that I'm probably not going to unveil. Even if I do unveil it, it's like it's probably more than likely that I'm not going to unveil. You know what I'm saying? But it's just basically a section, a portion that I've been researching more so recently regarding the East Indian Company. And initially, the way I did it was, I was reading about the Opium Wars a long time ago, and then reading about that, I wanted to know a little bit more deeper about the East Indian Company. Basically, get like a thorough context on the ground. So I learned a whole lot about them as far as how they started and their various presidencies. They had three main ones. Now, I could go through their whole history right now, but the reason why I'm recording this particular clip is because of the backdrop history that I recently studied that I do not want to forget by the time I do my blog. So, like, as far as the presidency of Benga, which once was called the presidency of Fort Williams, you know what I'm saying? Like, that history in particular starts really from 1696 on to, well, it starts around 1696, to be honest, because that's the year that they started building the fort of Bengal, which was called Fort Williams at the time. It took them about 10 years to construct it, up until 1706. Now, it's a whole little history prior to that, specifically in that region that I studied, and especially the Qing dynasty at the time, because as far as like the presidency of West Bengal, and I'm speaking too much on this already, I was going to hurry up and jump off this, but fuck it, this is how my mind be operating. As far as the presidency of West Bengal, you know what I'm saying? They largely traded in opium in that region. You know what I'm saying? China is basically just right fucking next door. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, as far as like this particular region that was under the tutelage of the West Bengal presidency, it included basically a good, like all of northeastern India, as well as Bangladesh as well. You know what I'm saying? The headquarters or the capital was called Calcutta. It became the capital in 1772 or whatnot. All the way up until, well, actually, even up until this, up until, basically up until this day, it's still the capital of India. I was going to say, like, even past 1858, when India became the British Raj. But anyway, see, I'm speaking. Anyway, to make a long story short, okay, that whole history I already know about. I can speak on that whole shit right now, but I just want to go into the backdrop real quick. Now, as far as the East India Company, I wanted to know, like I said, I knew that they started in 1600, and initially it was called Governor of the Merchants of the Company of London for trading in India and the East Indies. Later on, it became the East India Company. Now, that officially was proclaimed in 1600 or whatnot, as far as like when it became like a trading company officially. But as far as like, again, Fort Williams, that was damn near 100 years later. You know what I'm saying? 1696 up until 1706. So the other two presidencies that I know about, the other one was called the presidency of Madrasa, and then the other one was called, the one that's further southwest, it's called the presidency of Bombay. Now, I knew about them, but I know what I'm saying, I know a little, I guess you could say I had like sufficient information about them. But even like prior to those two presidencies, I didn't know, I was kind of curious. I'm like, I should go ahead and find out what took place within the first quarter of the 17th century. So recently, within this past week, I did a little bit more digging and I found out, okay, as far as like the East India Company, they initially started their factories along the east coast of India. Today, the province is called Andhra Pradesh. So that's like the second province after Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is at the southeastern corner of India. And then you have Orissa, the province of Orissa. And then you have Andhra Pradesh. And then so forth, going further north. That's where you eventually have West Bengal today, the province or whatever. But anyway, to make a long story short. So in doing my research, okay, the first two major ones, it was actually four of them, but there were two that really counted that were major, where a lot of trade and commerce took place at. The first one was called Masuli Patnam. M-A-S-U-L-I. I probably should take these glasses off. Masulipatnam. That was the very first one. That factory was constructed or put together or established in 1611. Again, within the province today of Andhra Pradesh. And what they traded in, it was just like, because like, for example, Fort Williams, you know, said the major commodities that the British or this company used to trade was silver and gold. And they traded that for spices and textiles, which was like a major commodity in India, as well as within Indonesia as well, because the trade was established in maritime Southeast Asia prior to India, right? So that's what they were trading. So like as far as Masuli Patnam, the factory was built there in 1611. All right, this is the very first one. And it lasted from 1611 up until 1629. And then the second period was from when it was reestablished, because it eventually got abandoned. Again, there's other factories that was created as well, especially the second major one that I'm about to speak on in the second one. That was only just like a year later. But as far as this first one, the second period of Masulipatnam was 1634 up until 1653. Now, going to the second major one that was contemporaneously at play along with this first one, it was called Surat. Now, Surat was in an entirely different location. It actually was on the opposite side of India, on the west coast of India. The province today that it was located at is called Gujarat. So, like, as far as that west coast, coastal border of India, at the very southwestern tip, you have Kerala, of course. Kerala is interesting too, not to veer, because that's where Christianity was first brought to India at. But as far as Kerala, you got Kerala, and then north of Kerala, you got Karnataka, and then north of Karnataka, that's when you have Maharashtra, which is very important. I'm about to speak on them in a second too. And then north of that province, that's where you have Gujarat. Now, again, within Gujarat, that's where Surat was established at. Now, as far as this particular portion of India, there's an empire that came that was a major factor during this time too. And I forgot to mention the Mughals as well, because let me see. Well, I don't think the Mughals, off the top of the dome, I don't think they played too much of a factor as far as Masuli Patnam. But I get to that in a second, if it's really relevant. But anyway, as far as Gujarat, now in this region, you had a major empire at the time. They were called the Maratha Empire. Now, the Maratha Empire lasted from 1574. No, I'm tripping. 1674 up until 1818. Now, I have to mention them because the way that how can I explain this? The way that factory started out, they had to get permission from this empire or whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Now, When the East India Company first landed there, it was in 1612 exactly. They had left Europe. They stopped at a couple of places, and on the way there, they stopped at Daman before they ended up there at Surat. And when they left, let me see, when they left Europe, it was in September of 1612. I think the exact day, was it September? No. It was a little earlier than that. But anyway, as far as when they finally made it to Surat, it was the 5th of September. Now, the Portuguese, for example, they had already kind of like been trading in the region, and they already had some type of pre-established relationship with the Maratha Empire. That's very important as well. When when the East India Company got there, there was a guy named Thomas Best. He was the captain at the time. Now they had like at least 4 ships, right? When they got there, these ships used to be called galleons at the time, right? So when they got there, it was the 5th of September. About 8 days later, that's when they found out that the Portuguese had arrived also. And I think they had around the same amount of galleons. They had four galleons, and then they had these like smaller like rowboat type. I don't want to call them ships, but they're kind of like boats and shit. They used to call them barks, Barks. I had to look that up to to understand exactly the difference between those and those galleons. They were basically they're like rowboats and shit. You know what I'm saying? Those type of boats was used to just for like supplies and if need be dirty tactics and shit, like for suicidal missions or like to set a ship on fire, they'll send a bark. I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, they arrived there. It was about like 16 barks. So the captain, Thomas Best, had found out about this, right? So when he got there, what he had to keep in mind, he tried to like seek the permission of the head of the Maratha Empire to have a factory established. Now, based on what I read, it was in his mind that if he was not going to be successful, if he was not going to get an okay, he was going to keep it pushing and go somewhere else because they were basically financed by the English. And at the time, the English told the government of England told them, okay, you got 3 years to make some type of profits from this. If you don't make any type of profit, we're not going to finance you. That was communicated to Thomas Best in 1609. Now, 1612 at this point. So hold on, let me light my cigarette shit. So it's 1612 at this point. So in his mind, he's like, okay, if they say no, we ain't gonna try to push the issue, we ain't gonna fight, we're gonna go somewhere else. So this is what ended up happening. Okay, on the, let me see, I think the 20th of September, that's when he sent a couple of men to get in contact with the Maratha Empire. And what happened was, I think, see, I don't want to mess up the dates. I think on the this is what happened. 10 days later, on the 30th of September, is when they found out that, the Maratha had imprisoned those men. So, Thomas Best made a decision to capture one of their ships, the Maratha ships or whatnot, and use that as like collateral to get their men back. So he ended up going northward to this place called Swali at the time. That's the English translation of the name. So he went north a month later. This is in October. So between the 14th and the 17th of October is when he made contact with the Maratha persons of the Maratha Empire or whatnot. And negotiations were also at play. So they eventually agreed to allow him to build a factory there, at least a temporary factory or whatnot. And a part of the stipulation was this is still subject to some type of ratifications if they decide to change some shit up as far as the Maratha Empire. Then after that, the 30th, well, actually the 29th, is when they got attacked by the Portuguese there, as far as the East India Company. So a battle took place on the 29th of October. Okay, the very next day, on the 30th, sometime like around 9 o'clock, the Portuguese tried to attack them again. But just before that happened, like earlier that day, you know what I'm saying, these 4 galleon ships that the Portuguese had, Thomas Bester, their man, somehow was able to sail past them, because 2 of these ships was basically essentially moored down already. The term used when I read about this was they were, I think, aground, basically. So 2 of their ships was basically like on top of very shallow water. So essentially they was just fucking moored. So they was able to sail past them without an issue. It wasn't until later on that night around 9 o'clock when the Portuguese tried something slick. So one of these bark ships that I talked about, they sent one of them toward their fleet, toward the East Indian Company's fleet, to try to set their ships on fire. So they set the bark on fire, basically, and try to send them toward their way. But based on what I read, you know what I'm saying, Thomas Best and them, they were already still vigilant. Like, they wasn't caught slipping or whatnot. So they were still alert. So they was able to see this bark at night before it had it close enough their way. So they basically just shot the motherfucker up. And I think like 6 or 8 people died or lost their lives. I'm going to assume they were aboard this bark. I don't even like thinking about that, and I don't want to waste too much time on this. I don't even know how that's the motherfucking case. That's like a suicidal mission and shit. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, that's what happened based on what I read. So the little conflict of fighting continued after that up until like December the 5th. And that's where Thomas Best himself had ended up leaving or whatnot. You know what I'm saying? The Maratha Empire was somewhat impressed by this, so sometime in January is when they made it. They basically granted the East India Company to establish their to have their factory built permanently there instead of it just being temporary. You know what I'm saying? Because they were impressed with them defeating the Portuguese. Again, the Portuguese was already like a hand into the picture before the arrival of the East India Company or whatever. So they kind of like gained the favor of the Maratha Empire, even kind of like going forward after this. So that's how their fort was established there in Surat. And Surat, for example, damn, how can I explain this? See, this is when I'm going to go into the history real quick. Because Surat, even though it's located in Gujarat, as far as like the presidency of Bombay, right? Which is basically kind of like, I want to say, I think southwest of Surat or whatever. But as far as that presidency, oh shit, hopefully I'm not fucking it up. No, I think Surat, I'm trying to think, was Surat also in Pradesh? Golly, I'm having a brain fart. Hopefully I remember by the time I get to the end of this. But as far as the west coast of India, right? This is when I got to go into the European history real quick for the background of it. Because the presidency of Bombay was initially started in 1665. Really 1668. No, 1665. And how they started was like, okay, Bombay, for example, which again, it's also, Bombay, for example, which is located in the province of Maharashtra today. It's at like the northern portion, actually, of Maharashtra, and it's also connected to the Konkan region. Today, it's all basically a single landmass. When it was first given to the East India Company, well, not really given to the East India Company, but when it was first given to the English in 1661, I want to say. It was like basically a compilation of at least 7 islands, right? It was called the 7 Islands of Bombay. Now, how that whole thing started, see now I got to go to the European part. Okay, and how that whole thing started, basically, the Portuguese, like I say, they had, the Portuguese basically granted, like gave that land, Bombay, for example, those islands, to the English. Why? Because, okay, see how I'm gonna explain this. Hold on, let me light my cigarette real quick again. I'm like the longer one. Shit. Hell, man. Again, even though this is like one of those, I'm not going to put up, you know what I'm saying? It's just for memory purposes in case I forget, because there's a lot of information that I'm breaking down in this fucking blog, you know what I'm saying? So even though this is just for memory purposes, I still don't use notes. Hell nah. Hold on, shit. Damn. That shit got it. Okay, here you go right here. See? I ain't bullshit. Okay. The granting of this fucking land really didn't have anything to do with no native Indians on the company. I mean, on the sub-Indian continent, right? Okay. I'm trying to think how I want to explain this. You know what I'm saying? Without, hold on. Okay, basically, okay. The Portuguese, the head of the Portuguese Empire at the time, so this is 1661, was freshly a guy named Alfonso VI. I believe, yeah, Alfonso VI, and he was the head of the Portuguese Empire from 1662 up onto 1683. Okay. His mother, a lady by the name of Luisa Guzman, was a co-regent during the beginning stages of his reign as well. Well, no, not necessarily, but like just before that, from like I think, yeah, she was during the very beginning stages of his reign as well. I think from like 1656 up until 1666, and even prior to that, her other son ruled prior to him, a guy named John IV, and she was co-regent during that time as well. I think let me see, if I don't, hopefully I don't forget, I think his shit was like, damn, I forget his shit, hold on. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that he reigned from 1640 as well, up onto at least her being co-regent during this period as well, up until 1656. One thing for sure that I do remember is that as far as like this land being given to the English from the Portuguese, it was a couple of secessions that was made. It wasn't just the land. This lady by the name of Catherine, right? Catherine was Louisa's daughter at the time. So she was given to Charles I, but not just her being given to Charles I, also like they had a port in North Africa and northern Morocco at Tangier. That port was also given to the English. As far as in Brazil and in the East Indies, basically within Indonesia at the time, where the spice trade was really big at as well. the English was also given trading privileges in Brazil and the East Indies, where the Portuguese had a foot in. So those like ports that their merchants would operate, where commerce took place at, they gave them trading privileges, but specifically as far as Tangier of northern Morocco, that was handed over to the English. And going back to Catherine of Braganza, as she's called, she was the daughter, thus sister, of John IV and his other brother who became the king of Portugal at the time, Alfonso VI. She was given in marriage to Charles II. So that was also intended with those islands at the time, the 7 islands of Bombay, that was also given to the English. It kind of happened for a couple of reasons. That was like okay, how can I put it? Well, anyway, so that's what happened, right? So anyway, that's what happened. I believe Louisa Guzman was co-regent during that time as well, 1640 up until 1656 with John IV, and then after John IV, from 1656 up until 1662, when her other son Alfonso VI became the head of Portugal. And again, from that period for about 11 years up until, not 11 years, but for about like 21 years up until 1683. As far as like Charles II, so that's how the agreement was had as far as the territory of Bombay. When the when the English got that territory, they handed it over to the East India Company about a year later, or whatever. But the East India Company didn't get it officially until 1665. Now, before I go further with that, I want to also mention that as far as like this marriage between Catherine, again, this is just so I don't forget, Catherine and Charles II, the agreement between those two took place in 1661 or whatnot, along with these territory secessions. But the marriage was finally had in 1662, sometime in May. I think like May the 21st, because also, yeah, as far as like her side of the fence, you know what I'm saying, secession that was made to her, which was very fucking light comparison. She was just given like religious freedom, like she was able to practice Catholicism still, because the English had, they were Christians, but they were like Anglican and something else, I forget. But she was able to practice her religion freely still or whatnot. And as far as like those trading privileges and shit, like that's not really all that important. Make a long story short, she arrived there in Portsmouth, England, May the 13th, between May the 13th and May the 14th. As far as Charles II, he didn't meet up with her until about 7 days later, on the 20th of May. And then the next day after that, that's when they got married. Now, as far as the East India Company being given the territory of Bombay, or the territory really being leased to them, that was a year later in 1662, but it wasn't made official until 3 years later in 1665. Now, before I go to the backdrop as far as the little European aspect of this, I want to go ahead and also say, when I was reading about this, I wanted to be absolutely clear. So I'm like, okay, because like I say, like the parts that I'm not going to mention on this particular recording, because it's too long. If I go a little further into the East India Company's history, as far as them in West Bengal and shit, and that which took place before that, this would be too long. I'm saving that for the official blog, because that's like definitely etched in my mind. But being that at this time the East India Company was still like a private enterprise, I kind of got a little bit confused. Not confused, but more questions came into my mind as far as like the territory of Bombay. It was basically leased for a rental fee to the East India Company. So I'm like, I wanted to know like how much did the government of England at the time have like a say so or control in that, like how much autonomy, like basically did the East Indian Company completely own that territory? And when I first looked it up, it was basically said yes, they did. But I came across two terms. One was called tail fee, and then the second one was called a simple fee. Their agreement was based on the first, a tail fee. So I read the difference between those two terms. A simple fee is like basically when you own this land without no type of provision, like you completely own this piece of land, like nobody is like renting it to you. The second one, the first one, as far as tail fee, it's a whole difference. It's like you own the land, but to an extent. So basically, all these various how can I put it, like attributed I don't want to just say stipulations, but like rules of this agreement, they didn't necessarily really own the land. Just to make it real simple, they pretty much really just rented that territory. Even though like the fee that they had to pay to the British or the English at the time was extremely cheap, it was like within the niceties of this agreement, basically for any other bullshit ass reason, not necessarily arbitration, but it was like four different terminologies that's applicable to how like the ownership of land today, to where like if the British wanted to kind of like manipulate certain shits, they could kind of like just take that shit over like they eventually did, and they use these niceties to eventually take the shit over in the first place, especially the East Indian Company. But pertaining to this territory of Bombay, the British essentially just rented that shit to the East India Company. That's all they did. I want to give an example, but I'm gonna keep it still simple on this. I'm not even gonna go too far on that. So that's what happened. They gave them that territory to rent, basically. And that's what they did going forward. Of course, it did turn out to be something that enriched the British government even later on, along with other territories within those other two presidencies as well. But that's the history of, that's how the presidency of Bombay started. And just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, I think, that's basically the history of them. The second major piece of land, and even though today Bombay is still a part of the major landmass, at the time it wasn't. It was just like 7 islands. But the first, at that time, major land outside of Bombay, but still a part of this presidency of Bombay at the time that the East Indian Company acquired, happened decades later. You know what I'm saying? Like a little bit over a century later, in 1802. There was a battle that took place. It was called actually a treaty. It was called the Treaty of Bassein, Bassein, and what basically was the catalyst of this treaty was a battle called the Battle of Prune or Pu'una that took place. You know what I'm saying? Whether you use an English term or a Hindu term or whatnot, which was because Pu'una was also the name of a city. You know what I'm saying? This battle took place at. Again, the translation of this term or the name of this city is Prune, Prune, the English translation. As far as the Indian translation of it is Poona or whatnot. So the Battle of Prune or Pu'una had took place, and it was really like a inner conflict between the Maratha Empire that took place at this battle or whatever, and the East India Company. At the end of this, how can I explain this? They basically had a hand in this, right? At the end of this motherfucking conflict, because they guided some of the tribes, you could say, you know what I'm saying? Because like, okay, the Maratha Empire was broken. It was kind of like, you know how like back in the day, when you think about the Malian Empire, especially when you go as far as like the first Mansa Sundhi Aeta Kita, how there were like various tribes, I think like 30 or 32 major tribes that constituted the Malian Empire, at least at their core at the time. It was kind of like that also in this region of India, you know what I'm saying? And uh, 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 Maharashtra at the time. So as far as this Maratha Empire, them in particular, they had various like prime ministers, you could say, but they call them Peshwas. They had an overall ruler, but they had different Peshwas. So like when any conflict took place where one tribe was against another one, you have like different Peshwas at odds with each other. So like during that battle of Puuna or Prune, that's what kind of like happened. So when I say like the East India Company had a hand in it, it was certain factions or certain Peshwas that they sided with who ended up becoming victorious also at the same time. Make a long story short, when the treaty was had, it was in December 31st of 1802. And because the East India Company had played a part in it or had a hand in that conflict or whatever, especially the side that came out victorious, you know, they had as opposed to those that were defeated and also defeated or whatnot. You know, that was like the first the agreement within this treaty, because I read it as well. It was like basically it was legal for the East Indian Company to also encroach them. Like one stipulation was like this particular Peshwa, he had to have at least like 6,000 persons of the East India Company around him. And this another stipulation was whatever decisions that this particular faction within the Maratha Empire chose to make, they had to consult with the East India Company as well. You know what I'm saying? And also like the commerce that took place as well, the East India Company was able to benefit from it. So based on what I read, this treaty basically engendered their downfall pretty much overall later on, because also within this treaty, that's how the East India Company also gained major territory on land. Keeping in mind at the time, the city of Bombay was just like broken into like 6 or 7 different islands still. But because of this treaty in 1802, which was signed December 31st of that year, that's when the East India Company was able to get some major actual territory on the mainland itself within Maharashtra. And that kind of like facilitated even the larger, more grasp of gains that was made later on down the line, because again, the Maratha Empire ended up collapsing basically, or was completely motherfucking demolished in 1818. So that's only like 16 years later. This treaty, based on what I read, played a big part in that. So that's the history. That's how the presidency of Bombay basically took off. Now, even prior, I just want to mention this because it's relevant to me still. Even prior to 1662 or whatnot, as far as Charles II, just because I mentioned him. Now, he was the king or head of England, really England, Ireland, and London in 1662. From 1662 up until 1685. Now, before that, the English had also inner conflict as well that lasted for about 11 years. Well, was it longer than that? Wait a minute. Hold on, wait a minute. I'm trying to think. I don't want to forget the Commonwealth period when like those 3 factions, basically London, Ireland, and England, had got split up and shit. And you know, it was like 3 different wars that took place within that time period. I want to say, let me see. see, 11, let's see, 1662. Actually, Charles II became the head of England in 1660. 1660, actually, up until 1685. So I think from 1660 to 1649, that's what it was. That's the period of the Commonwealth of England. That's when they were split into three different factions, because prior to that, Charles I was the head of England, and he had ended up getting executed or whatever. So like Charles II, he got executed because like the inner conflict that was going on as far as within the Parliament as well, and them being at odds. Because I read about this too. They was basically at odds with Ireland as well, and Charles I seemingly was like trying to like he went into a chamber one time and he tried to get certain key politicians within the parliament locked up. And it was something that was kind of like not in tangent with legality at the time. It was something that was taken very seriously. So a major quarrel had took place at this point, and basically his arrest as far as Charles I was called for. It was a couple of people that was against it, but it ended up happening. He was put on trial. You know, he argued that it was illegal for him to be put on trial because he was the head of England at the time or whatever, this and that. But he was eventually found guilty and he was executed because of that. Now, when I read about this, I was kind of like thinking also like, okay, even though they was kind of like at odds with the people of Ireland, did he kind of like show them favor or whatever? Because Ireland was Catholic for the most part. So when I read a little bit about this, it's like one of those things. It's kind of like what the it's kind of like what the jargon. This is how I'm looking at it. It's kind of like the jargon with the East India Company as far as them initially gaining the territory of Bombay. It's like it's one of those things that you really got to read for yourself to kind of figure out, because the language is almost like it's not ambiguous. It's almost like ambivalent. It's like one of those things like if you want to get a definitive understanding about it, you got to really read that motherfucking language for yourself to fully get it, because even until this day, it's still like different. And like I said, when I first was reading, when I was trying to figure out like, okay, how much say so did the British have regarding the territory of Bombay or whatever? You know, when I first read articles about it, they were saying that they didn't have like no say so, whatever, like that the East India Company completely owned it. There was no stipulation, and this was also in the content in the wording as well. And that little this basically how they referred to it. That little payment that they had to pay and shit, that little yearly payment and shit, was like a testament to that, because it was so small on a larger scale of things. So it was like almost like I guess supposedly a great intimation, like, yes, they just paid this, so that little payment was nothing but like a motherfucking tribute or some shit. You know what I'm saying? Basically, this is the point they were trying to make. It's almost like how like when the Christians within the Roman Empire in 311 was finally allowed to get them to practice their religion. The only stipulation was, hey, just show the emperor some respect. You know what I'm saying? Keep that motherfucker in your prayers. That's how they broke that down. But again, when I read further about it, that's when I came across this term, tail feet. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. And I'm reading about the term tail feet and what it entails, as opposed to this other term, which is simple tail. I was like, oh no, that's not necessarily true. The motherfucking English did have a say so. You know what I'm saying? So going back to this whole thing about whether Charles I had a little favor for the Irish, that's like one of those continuous debates that's going on. It's almost like indirectly, but not necessarily. That's how they was explaining it. You know what I'm saying? Even though he kind of like went against Parliament. You know what I'm saying? In a certain sense. But, long story short, so that's what happened. Okay, you had the war in London that took place, and you had the war in Ireland that took place. These two various kingdoms or whatever. So another guy later on did eventually unify all three of them. His name is Cromwell. You know what I'm saying? Cromwell. And that's when his title was established, which I kind of like. They called him Lord Protectorate. Lord Protectorate of England or whatever, or the British, you know what I'm saying? But basically, all three factions into one. Even that was confusing for me when I first read it, because I'm like, okay, as far as Charles II, you know what I'm saying? They were like, okay, when he finally got the crown or whatever, when he got the crown, when he placed back, because he still has support from the Irish. Keep that in mind. But when he was finally given place as the king of England, you know, they was like, okay, once he was established on the throne, the people still consider him. It's a term I forget. I think it started with an R. Like they still would trace his initial date as the king of England back to when the Commonwealth period started, so it would be like 1649 and shit. You know what I'm saying? That's how much favor or respect they had for him. But again, a lot of that was from the people of Ireland as well. I almost called the fucking term Ragnol or some shit like that, something like that. But anyway, yeah. But anyway, so I was confused at first because I'm like, okay, so the Commonwealth period, how the fuck it can end in 1660 when Charles II became the king of Ireland, London, and England? How could you say the Commonwealth period ended that time when this guy Cromwell basically became Lord Protectorate? And when I looked it up and what it meant, yes, it entailed him being Lord Protectorate period over all three kingdoms, and it was the highest title in the land. You know what I'm saying? I'm reading, I'm like, hold on, what the fuck? So I had to, I'm thinking about this shit. And when I asked that question, Google asked that question for AI, and it was basically saying the same shit that I'm saying. Basically, like it's like one of those things. Like, yes, he was basically literally like he basically did unify all three of those kingdoms or whatever. So really, he was the head. You know what I'm saying? Even though he's given that title Lord Protectorate, he was really the head before Charles II. But Charles II again was reestablished back on the throne or whatnot. So that's the history of that. Now, as far as Portugal, another thing I don't want to forget, and a lot of this, like this European portion, it's for like when I go into like other, like when I study other topics and shit. You know what I'm saying? It's like giving me a certain shit that I may forget. Like it'll be etched in my memory and shit. Like, you know what I'm saying? So like if I read further about something that was going on in motherfucking Portugal or some shit, or Spain or something, I still got that familiarity geopolitically on other things that was going on and shit, and pre-established kings or whatever. But as far as like Portugal, this is another thing. They were also warring with Spain, and it got kicked off in 1640. Again, this is the geopolitical shit that's still interesting to me. It got kicked off in 1640. By the way, let me also give you an example of what I mean by that. Because in 1640, that's when this guy named John Punch was an indentured servant here in America. You know what I'm saying? Within the Virginia colonies and shit. And in 1640, it was still only motherfucking, I think, 150 slaves and shit. So again, geopolitically it's interesting. I ain't gonna go too deep. But anyway, 1640. That's when they were at odds with the Spanish crown at the time. They wanted to be independent from them. And let me light this shit up real quick. Motherfucker! Oh, I thought my phone. I thought the time stopped. Hey JL, you are the shit. So in 1640, they wanted to be independent from the Spanish crown. Took a minute. It was like basically like just before that, how can you put it? Before that paradigm when they wanted to separate, it had been the case for both countries since 1580 or whatever. So in 1640, that's when it started. And they later on got assistance from the French. and the French pulled back sometime around, damn, what did they pull back? It's 1659. This is why I almost got confused with the English and shit. But in 1659, they pulled back, and it was called the Treaty of the Pyrenees or whatever. But about 9 years after that is when the Portuguese was finally successful in establishing their independence from Spain, not just as a declaration, but also being recognized as a sovereign nation from the Spanish crown as well. And that happened in the treaty that very year, and the treaty was called the Treaty of Lisbon. And let me see, am I forgetting anything else or shit? But like I said, I just wanted to really get on that motherfucking East Indian Company. Oh yeah, the presidency of Madrasa. Okay, the presidency of Madrasa. Okay, now that happened after, just before the whole dynamic as far as like the presidency of Bombay. This happened in 1640. And the difference between Madrasa, as this particular area was called at the time, the difference between Madrasa or like a Bombay or like Fort Williams within Calcutta and shit, is that this land was completely uninhabited. So there was another like empire, really, they're not that relevant or whatever, who granted the East India Company this piece of land or whatever that was called Madrasa at the time. And they granted them that in 1639. So in 1640, that's when they started their construction, I believe. It took about 4 years for them to build a fort there, the fort of St. George. So it was finished in 1644. I'm trying not to go into the motherfucker, the presidency of Fort Williams history and shit. You know what I'm saying? Because when I speak on that during my blog, that's when I'm gonna break down the whole Qing dynasty and all of that. You know what I'm saying? Like for example, in 1644, I believe that's when the Qing dynasty took, I think Taiwan, or was it Beijing? Let me see. Probably Beijing, China, I think, if not Taiwan. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? As far as 1644, that's when construction was finished. Now, just like all the other presidencies and shit, what the East India Company mainly traded was as far as like their particular commodities was like, again, silver and shit and gold. But as far as like the major commodity in India as well, or outside of what the Europeans brought, as far as in particular those of the East India Company, it was the same shit like everywhere else: spice and textiles, because textiles was what India was plentiful in. Two particular types that I read about. One is called a muslin, muslin, and then another one is called a calico, calico, you know, or whatever. Like they're just basically like clothing, like materials and shit. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, as far as like within the fort, the fort of St. George, that was also at play in their commerce as well. Let me see what else. And just like all the other presidencies, you know what I'm saying, they eventually had their own governors as well up until really before 1858. Because see, this is when it becomes relevant. I'm gonna go ahead and speak on it real quick. 1772. Not the fact that in that very year is when Calcutta became like the capital of both the presidency of Fort Williams and India as a whole, basically. Not just that, but more so like there's this guy, his name is Warren Hastings. I just read about him yesterday. Hold on. And he was made the governor of the presidency of Bengal in 1772. Now, here's why I'm bringing this up ahead of time. Because also in that same year, again, going back to like British say so over the East Indian Company. During that same year, actually the very next year, but of course, you know what I'm saying, any act is already kind of like debated upon, and you know what I'm saying, and the intricacies of this act it's already like discussed like a year prior before it comes into law. The very next year, actually, the act is called the Regulating Act. Basically, what this did was put the British government in control of the administration of the East India Company. Again, this is why I know I'm correct when I talk about that tail fee term or whatever. That basically explain the agreement that between the English government in 1662, even though more so 1665, as far as like the territory of Bombay, when they finally gave it to the East India Company. What happened a century later basically validates the fact that, like, okay, I'm on point. You know what I'm saying? As far as like what I think about this agreement and how like the East India Company didn't necessarily really own that territory. They really did just rent that shit. You know what I'm saying? And the English government had a big hand in that, and they had some type of even if you don't say like direct, they had enough of a potential mechanism of control based on the agreement of that territory being given to them in the first place. This is why, like a year later, this is how I look at it. I know I'm correct. This is why, not a year later, but a century later, in 1772, actually 1773 is when a regulating act was established, and the British were given like administrative control over the East India Company. And some of their reasons, based on what I read, is like, you know, like they felt like you know, because a lot of fighting and battles between like native kingdoms and empires within India. And within all three of those presidencies had took place up until that point as well. And there was a little bit of financial strain here and there that went on and shit like that. And it was also claimed that they were almost damn near bankrupt. This is aside from the other fact, by the way, as well, as far as like their soldiers, the soldiers that the East India Company owned, almost kind of like on some Blackwater type shit. You know what I'm saying? The soldiers that they had under them was like at least 200,000 by that point or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Or near that point. But even though the number had fluctuated back and forth before that, and it was supposed to I'm going somewhere with this, by the way, YouTube. It was supposed to have been very low, even like a century before that, having a peak about like 400 men, even like during that very motherfucking century earlier on in that century, the 18th century as well. You know what I'm saying? But by this point, the 1770, basically by the 1770s, they had a strong 2,000, I believe, or at least close to it, about 200,000 soldiers. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, as far as about 1773, it was claimed like they were the British government was worried about their funds or the lack of funds and little things that had took place or whatever. So they feel like they need to step in as like a supervisor to help guide the company. And so they changed their inner mechanistic, like they changed their inner structure, the way that they collect the money, tax, all these things. The different motherfucking jargons came into play, like farming tax, land tax, all this type of shit. And when they changed it in 1773 based on this regulating act, that's when they didn't focus more so on goods as payment for funds, as payment for taxes and shit. They still focus. That's when they really focused. As far as the British, thus the East India Company focused more so on actual cash money for this. This turned out a big ass hindrance as far as like the native Indians and shit on the ground, because like you had what was called cash crops, and I think what's the other term? Cash crops and like, damn, what's the other one? Good crops or some cash crops and the other, anyway, cash crops is basically like damn. Okay, one basically is like the food, like the food that you will grow on your farm or whatever to feed your stock, as well as yourselves. The other one would be what you would sell. You know what I'm saying? And because at this point, based on a regulating act, the British focused more so on cash for payments. It kind of like bankrupt a lot of people on the ground, especially like the native Indians and shit. Some of the like the subjects of the English as well. You know what I'm saying? It kind of made shit a little bit more difficult for them, which snowballed later on and shit. This is when you get closer to like 1857 and the Sepoy conflicts and shit like that. But I ain't gonna touch on all that right now. But as far as like in 1773, this is when they changed the structure of the East India Company. So this guy, Warren Hastings, for example, being that he was already the governor, well, being that he was placed as the governor, the new governor of the Bengal presidency, and then you had the other two governors, the one of the Madrasa presidency, and then the other one of the Bombay presidency. This guy Warren Hastings was given like he was made like the governor general. You know what I'm saying? So even though he was still the governor of the Bengal presidency, he had power and rank over the other two governors of those other two presidencies, thus given the title Governor General. That started from that point up until 1858. Again, I ain't finna go too far on 1858, but as far as this particular regulating act, what it also installed was an additional council called the Supreme Council of Bengal. And this guy, Warren Hastings, along with his title, Governor General, was placed as the fifth member of this council, and it was supposed to be like a checks and balances mechanism. So it also put his power at balance too, because those other four individuals are part of this council. Now, that was established officially in 1774. You know what I'm saying? But again, that is also something that sprang forth from the regulating act a year prior to that. So that's like the background that I wanted to record and put on YouTube, again, in case I forget anything. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to keep the discipline and not go motherfucker further. So I'm already at 1 hour and 30 minutes, so I'm gonna keep it at that, so I can listen to this and then check my facts and make sure I'm on point. But yeah, it's your boy JL. The Aeta Negritos is coming very motherfucker soon, and it's gonna be a motherfucking. It's going to be one of my best vlogs, you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of the shit that I'm touching on. Like the beginning of that vlog, basically, I'm going to spend a great deal talking about Paleolithic history. So it's a lot of, how can I put it? Homo sapien specimens and the things that took place in the different Homo sapien specimens, the different types of Neanderthal specimens. I'm gonna break all that shit down. Why I think they were black, all that, their genetics, their paternal and maternal haploid or haplo group codes, all of that. I'm gonna break that down at the beginning. But when I get past that point, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm breaking down the entire fucking region of Southeast Asia, Maritime Asia, and a lot of history. Basically, India is going to be included in that as well. But this particular portion right here, this is when I go. The reason I'm going to speak on this type of shit uh, like the East India Company and John Locke and because I'm gonna say it anyway. Okay, like for example, 1858. You know what I'm saying? This is after 1858. Actually, yeah, actually, the very next year, 1859, that's when the Andaman and Nicobar Islands come into play. A lot of Negritos lived there as well. You know what I'm saying? Because it became like a colony, like a prison colony at the time. And by like I want to say like the end of the first quarter of the 20th century, you had at least like 80,000 prisoners that were brought there. A lot of that played a part into like the population decimation of the Negritos as well. You know what I'm saying? So like when I speak on stuff like that, like this guy John Locke, uh, who wrote the Second Treatise of Government in 1690, and how his philosophy was basically used as like I'm trying to use a neutral term right now. It's like a backdrop for this like land expansion and shit like that. The reason I'm gonna speak on the reason that I study this part of the history as well, because I'm not just gonna break down Paleolithic. Like I'm not just gonna be like, okay, the Negritos, you know what I'm saying, they come from this or whatever. They get the three major migrations, 40,000 years ago, 25,000 years ago, then 12,000 years ago, and then to northern motherfucking Vietnam and the Baxonian cultures, and before that the Hoabinhian cultures, and even prior to the 40,000, the first major migration 40,000 years ago along the southern dispersal route and all that type of shit. Even prior to that, between 70 and 50,000 years ago, you had, you know what I'm saying, Africans, you know, even before, like, I'm not just gonna speak on that. That's gonna be at the beginning of my shit. But as far as like what took place after that, you know what I'm saying, in the midst of the Negritos, I have to break all of that down as well. That's why I study these type of things as well. It's very important. Like Maurice Vidal Portman, you know what I'm saying? That's very important to me because he played because he actually studied the Negritos. I read all his shit too. That's gonna play a major factor. All of that is relevant in the more recent sense. Let's put it like that. In the more recent sense, you know what I'm saying? I'm not just gonna go back 10,000s of years and shit. You know what I'm saying? And even like the Philippines and all that, like Luzon, Mindanao, or not Mindanao, before Mindanao, the Visayan Archipelago, all that type of shit, all of that. You know what I'm saying? The Dennis events, all that plays a part. So that's why I like this blog and I've been taking my time on it. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of shit that I'm going through. So I usually don't do too many of these, like record these just to remember certain things. I usually keep all this shit in mind. But this is one of those blogs that it's a lot of information. Not that it's too much, not at all. You know what I'm saying? It's just, how can I put it? Making sure I don't have to backtrack and read certain things again. That's all. So I'm gonna keep it as simple as that. I said enough of this shit. It's your boy JL. Again, I probably won't put this out. If I do put this out, it's kind of like one of those, this is what I've been doing. You know what I'm saying? I ain't been bullshitting. If I do put this motherfucker, even if I put this bitch up, goddamn it, tomorrow, it's one of those, goddamn it, hey, I ain't been bullshitting. You know what I'm saying? Just let your ass, let y'all know, YouTube, I ain't been bullshitting. I take my shit very seriously. All right, it's your boy JL.